Hi, Scott Stork with Polaris Law Group in St. Charles, Missouri. I'm an estate planning attorney here. And a lot of what we do is what we call asset protection planning. So we use estate planning for an estate to protect assets. And so as you might imagine, we get a lot of quizzical looks about what are assets, what's asset protection mean? And so I like to tell the story of the school bus story. So before we get there, let's talk about ways that we can plan and potentially ways that we can't plan and what happens. So if we don't plan at all, we can end up in probate court. So probate court, if we don't do planning, if we don't say where our assets go, things can go into probate court, which is typically where we don't want them to be. So that's one potential issue. Another way that a lot of people plan is using what we call beneficiary designation. So you may have done this on life insurance or other assets that you've got, retirement accounts, things like that, that just simply tell financial institutions, upon my death, this is where I want you and who I want to have this. So on life insurance, you'll see this is where most people know it from. Upon my death, if I have a $500,000 life insurance policy, I want this percentage to go to this percentage to go to this person, and that institution is how I want you to distribute that property or those assets. So beneficiary designations is another way. Another way might be using estate planning. So we can use things like trusts, which basically say, have instructions that say this is how my property should be distributed. And there can be different ways to do that. Now, as you might imagine, we, as I said, do a lot of asset protection in our trusts when we pass things on to our loved ones. So let's use an example. Let's say that I have a $1 million estate, and I'm not a very good estate planning attorney in this story, so let's say I didn't do any planning at all. And my son has inherited $500,000 potentially, and my daughter has inherited $500,000 potentially. But let's talk about the ways that they might inherit. So let's say that I didn't do any planning at all. All of my property and assets went into the probate process. And how probate court pays is basically just what we call a lump sum. It's just a check, typically, to our beneficiaries. And so now Owen's gotten $500,000 in his name. My other daughter, my daughter Avery, has gotten $500,000 in her name. And now let's say Owen has inherited this money, and let's say he's driving in his car, he's going to work, he's not paying attention, he's going a little too fast, and he broadsides into a school bus. So, bad accident. Let's say that there's kids that have passed away. Let's say that there's kids that are injured. So there have been school bus accidents around. The last one that we saw that was kind of a really bad type of accident, and the one that I often point to was about $11 million judgment against the driver. So let's say that he's had this accident, and now my son Owen gets sued. And he gets sued by a personal injury attorney. So you'll see a lot of them on the billboards around. But let's say now he's gotten sued, and there, as you might imagine, let's say that we've got this big judgment, and there is no amount of insurance that's going to be able to cover this accident, right? So an $11 million judgment, let's say, and he's got auto insurance, maybe he's got what we call an umbrella policy, but you can't have enough insurance to cover that much. So now, what is that personal injury attorney going to do to try to recover all of that extra money? Now, Owen's responsible, and he's taken full responsibility for this accident, but he's saying, look, this is what I have insurance for. But if he doesn't have enough of it, now they're going to go after personal assets, everything in Owen's name. So bank accounts and other things that he owns, they're going to say, well, we want that judged so that we can use it to satisfy this judgment. So, oh gosh, that's a bad thing. And guess what? Owen just received an inheritance from me through probate court of $500,000, and that was paid basically as a check into his name. And now that personal injury attorney can use what Owen has just gotten as the inheritance to help satisfy that. So now Owen's lost everything. He doesn't have anything to fall back on because all of it's been taken because of this accident. Well, let's say instead I just use beneficiary designations. And so beneficiary designations, as I said, just say upon death, this is where I want things to go. Now, if you know anything about beneficiary designations, they work kind of the same way. What it says is financial institution, now just pay in a lump sum this money out to my beneficiaries. And so now Owen has inherited and Avery has inherited my estate, but they've done it basically the same way. They didn't have to go through the probate process, right? Because beneficiary designations are designed to avoid that, but they've just gotten a check in their name, and Owen hits the school bus, he gets sued, they go after personal assets. Guess what happens to the inheritance that he got through beneficiary designations? It's the exact same result. Those beneficiary or those assets in his name now get taken, and he's left with nothing again. Well, what if I do a trust? So the great thing is that there can be some good ways to play with this and deal with this, but a lot of trusts are written to do different things. So let's talk about kind of a common type of trust that we see a lot out there, and that's what I call a probate avoidance trust. So as the name implies, we create the trust, but the whole point of it is to avoid probate. So what it says is, upon my death, whatever I own that's in this trust, it just goes outright to my loved ones, to my kids, and now Owen and Avery basically get a lump sum again, paid in their name, just goes outright, avoids probate, but same facts. Owen hits the school bus, he gets sued. Guess what happens to those to that inheritance? Poof, it's gone again, because it's just a probate avoidance trust. What about the most common type of trust that you'll see out there? It's what I call a 3 scoops trust. And so what it says is at age 25 or a different age, my kids will receive 1/3 of their inheritance. At 30, they receive the next scoop, the next third, and at 35, they receive the remainder. So it comes out as 3 scoops, and you see this all the time. Attorneys do these all the time. The whole point of them is supposed to be that the inheritance comes out in lumps so that they can't spin the whole thing all at one time. But it doesn't do much for us from an asset protection standpoint. So again, Owen hits the school bus, gets sued, same thing. Now what happens? Well, let's say he's 24, and so that personal injury attorney can say, hey judge, we know that there's a scoop coming out at 25, we want to take that. And they're going to keep that judgment alive, and then at 30 they can say, judge, we want the next scoop, and they can keep it alive, and at 35 they can take the rest of it. So what it does is it spreads out the pain for Owen. He basically loses the whole inheritance again because that money is going to come out into his name. But what if we do kind of a treasure chest, right? And it's a treasure chest that says on the side of it, don't pay what we call involuntary creditors. So don't pay the accident. And so again, that personal injury attorney may be able to go after the insurance. They may be able to go after other things that are in Owen's name, but if he hits that school bus, now what we can say is, judge, we are not allowed, we don't need to pay out of this protective trust because Owen's dad said on the side, don't pay the creditor, don't pay the involuntary creditor. So even though we're still taking responsibility, etc., what we don't want is Owen to be left destitute with nothing. At the very least, that $500,000 inheritance he got from me can be there for him to fall back on, and it's protected from the personal injury accident. And so that's what we mean by asset protection. Now, admittedly, school bus accidents are not very common, as you might imagine. So really think about other things that can be asset protection. What happens if Owen just gets into a regular car accident and gets sued? What happens if, for some reason, he has to declare bankruptcy in the future? What about if he gets married and gets divorced, or has some sort of bad business deal, or just something where if we leave him that lump sum, it can be taken from him? But if we leave it kind of in a way that we've planned for, that's been very intentional, we can protect it so that he's the only one that can get into this and nobody else can. And so we find just about every client likes the idea of asset protection, whether that is from the accident or keeping their inheritance kind of in their bloodline so that it goes from their kids, maybe to their grandkids, etc., down the line. So asset protection has a very big role in what we do. It's something that not all attorneys are great at planning for, but it's kind of one of the things that's our bread and butter here. So if you'd like to talk about that or have questions about that or maybe start the planning process of your estate, please let us know. Again, I'm Scott Stork with Polaris Law Group. Our phone number is 636-757-3850. You can find us at our website at polarisplans.com. And thanks for listening, and hope you found this helpful.